Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how I painted this portrait painting, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the portrait painting process. Let's check it out. So today I'm working on a relatively small portrait study. The size of the paper that I'm working on is 6 inches by 6 inches, which is a lot smaller than the usual 9 by 12 inches that I work on for portrait studies. And I wanted to do a portrait of this size because I think that oftentimes with portraits, because faces are just very technically difficult to paint, and because you have to be so precise, when I paint portraits, I tend to move more in the direction of perfectionism and trying to paint every single detail to a very high level of resolution. However, I find that some of my favorite portrait painters, they seem very good at being really parsimonious with their brush strokes in a way that maybe they paint some areas in the paintings to very high resolution, but then they leave other areas to be more suggestive. And they really focus on capturing the essence of what they're painting without painting every last detail exactly as they see it. So one way that I've found is helpful to paint looser and to paint in a more expressive way and to paint in a way that gets at this essence rather than getting lost in the detail is through painting on a relatively small scale, or on smaller than whatever you're comfortable with, and using a relatively large brush as well. So for this painting, I was also inspired by the work of Kehoe. She's an amazing figurative painter, and she does a lot of small portrait studies. A lot of the work that she does is actually self-portraits. She has this really great self-portrait series. And what I love about her work is that she's very good at breaking down portraits into these interesting geometric shapes, and it almost becomes more about the shapes and the colors that are in the image rather than the particular portrait itself and the subject matter itself. So with that in mind, I decided to do this small portrait study, and throughout this study, I tried to keep in mind what are the key shapes here and what are the key forms that I'm trying to capture. So as you can see at this point, I've really broken the portrait down into the dark areas, which is her hair and her dark shirt. The shadow side of the face, which I did in kind of a warm reddish brown, the light side of the face, which is in more of a cooler beige color, and then the background, which I chose to make kind of this aqua green, light kind of pale green background, because I thought that would contrast really nicely with the red tones in the shadow side, or in the shadow side of her face. So once I have all these key sections blocked in, then I have a really good sense of how the painting's going to look in the end and where it's going to go, and then I can go in and start refining. So I first go in and I refine the dark parts of the painting, and this is because I use Arches oil paper that kind of absorbs some of the dark colors. So I go in and I add some more dark paint to that to strengthen those colors, and then I can start getting into the specific details of the face. So initially, I just kind of suggest where the eyes are, where the nose is, and where the lips are, just to get the overall spacing, but I don't add very much detail. But at this point, I start going in and refining those areas, and I start softening some of the edges around where the light turns into shadow around her cheek. I go in and define her lips and her other features, and still here I'm trying to be very simplistic with my brush strokes. I'm trying not to get too much into the detail because after all, this painting is relatively small and I'm using a pretty large brush. So if I can get away with doing the features with just 1 or 2 brush strokes, then that's what I'm going to try to do. And so here I'm going in and I'm refining the area around her cheek and the shadow of her face, and I'm just trying to give some definition to her cheekbones, which are pretty prominent, and the overall shape of her face, not going too much into detail, but giving just enough of a value shift to suggest the shape of her face. Then I go back and I refine some of the lines. I noticed during this process I lost a bit of the dark reddish brown of the shadow that I really liked, so I went back in and I added some more of that to her face, just to give this sense of warmth in the shadow tones. And then I go and refine the details around her eyes. Also make some more crisp lines defining her hair. I really liked hair as like a geometric shape, so I really wanted to make sure that those lines were very sharp and crisp, those edges were strong. And then also I went and refined the edge around her jawline too to make it more pronounced. And as I'm going through this process, I'm trying to still keep things relatively simple and maintain a lot of the beautiful geometric lines that I can create with my brush. I think it's really fun to try to simplify something as round and organic and curvy as a human face, and simplify it into what are some of the basic shapes. If I want to make this with just some simple straight lines and polygons, then how am I going to make this? And so that's kind of what I was trying to hold on to with this whole painting, even as I went in and refined a lot of these details and added in different components. And now finally we're getting towards the end of the painting, and we're getting to one of my favorite parts of the portrait painting, where I build up the highlights on the light side of the face. And usually when I paint the light side of the face, I intentionally make it a little darker than I actually see it with my eyes. And the reason I do this is because I like to build up the highlights in kind of one layer on top of another. So then I feel like it creates a really interesting sense of light and form when you do it in this way. So here I'm slowly adding more and more light to the light side of her face, and I'm trying to add it in very strategic points to bring out her features. And I'm not exactly adding all of the highlights that I see in my reference image, but instead I'm trying to be very particular and focus on a few points that will help guide the viewer's eye, which for me, in most of my paintings, I like the viewer to focus on the eyes of the portrait and maybe also some other features. Like maybe I will make the highlights to guide your eye from her eye down to her lips, and then you can move around in the rest of the image. So lastly, I'm just going in with a very small detail brush and adding some highlights with that, and this is a little round brush that gives the highlights a slightly different form than most of the other brush strokes, so I thought it would make a cool effect. So yeah, this is how the final painting turned out. I hope you guys really liked it. Let me know if you like portrait paintings or still lifes or other types of paintings. I'd love to get your feedback. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know in the comments below and subscribe to my channel. And thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.